Why don't I start? I'm the person who put in the chat the advice in your new job that you need to sit in the uncomfortable feeling sometimes of getting a lot of information, not perhaps being able to absorb it all at once. And so that is what we are going to do here today, is we are going to provide you with a ton of information as well as some links and resources to learn more about what we talk about today. We're going to go through some of this rather quickly, but you will be given the slides. So, and we will leave opportunities at the end. We'll try to leave 10 or 15 minutes to ask questions. So my name is Jenny Pearlman. I am the Chief of the Safety Prevention and Early Intervention Branch at the California Department of Social Services. Colleagues with Hillary Conrad, who you heard from today, who's part of our team in the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. So we really lead this prevention-focused work for the Department of Social Services, although we work very closely across the full department with our other colleagues. So I'm honored first that you picked our group. In my job, I am responsible for policy, program planning, funding of organizations and counties related to prevention and early intervention strategies. I am new to this job. I've been at this at the state for about 6 months, and I come to this work after many years in the field as an advocate and working for community organizations and working on systems change. So I was on the other side, and this is giving me a really amazing lens to all the work that the state is doing. I'm joined by my colleague, Shevon Walker, who she'll introduce herself when she starts her portion of the program, of the presentation. And during our time together, Shevon and I are going to talk about how CDS is responding to what probably many of you know, what many of you see in your work, that years of experience and data and evidence have shown us that children have better outcomes when they grow up safely within their families and their communities with the supports they need to thrive. And this shouldn't be a surprise, but there was a point in time in our history where we turned to this idea that we need to protect children. And sometimes that protection was protection from their families or protection from their communities. And we now know that that is necessary in some instances and necessary when there's a true safety risk. But children thrive when they stay within their families. So we're moving towards that. And in partnership with the state and the county and community partners and tribes, people with lived experience, CDSS is working to do the things that I just talked about: policies, programs, tools, guidance, funding, sustainability, to really ensure that families have what they need, that they're supported, and that our local partners know how to provide that support before crises arrive and families then are engaged with the child welfare system. Today, we're going to just focus on primarily on two of the initiatives that are happening at CDSS. One is the transformation of mandated reporting, and the other is developing a structure for prevention throughout all communities in California through our Family First Prevention Services program and through supporting community pathways. What we're really looking to do here is both reduce the number of reports to child welfare, reports that might not be needed, where families would be better supported in their communities by community agencies, and then to really build up that system of support and services. Next slide. Quickly, the agenda. What are the specifics we're going to talk about? I'm going to go quickly through just some data and information as to why there is this move. Why is there an intentional shift? As Hillary said, why is prevention so hot now? And then we're going to look at some of the transformation of that front end, that we need to narrow that door to child welfare when it's unnecessary? How do we address the over-reporting to child welfare? How do we start changing that mindset and changing that system? And then I'm going to talk quickly. I'm going to hand it off to Shevon, who's going to talk more about those state programs to build up that safety net, that system of prevention throughout California. And then I'm also going to touch very briefly on how all of this must be founded on principles of harm reduction, as well as our proactive support of counties and tribes of the local communities so that they may integrate prevention and support for families at the local level. Next stage. Next slide. So I always want to ground us first and start with, for me, my why, which probably is also many of yours, is really the impact that separating families or children from their families has on people. And I'm not going to read all of this, but these quotes come from the members from what was the mandated reporting to community supporting task force. So that task force that was created to reform mandated reporting. And one I want to highlight is Shelley. And Shelley, who was on that task force and comes to this with lived experience, she talks about how the life of her and her daughter would have been so different if they had gotten the support they needed rather than her child being removed and placed in care. And she also talks about how, despite being reunified from her child, that the effects were long lasting and the trauma to her child and the rest of her family were long lasting. Next slide, please. So the experiences that you saw on the other slide and research has shown us that the impact of child maltreatment can last a lifetime. So that is, again, why do we want to prevent that child maltreatment? Because of the long-term effects. And we really need to focus on that prevention and early intervention to halt the trauma and long-term consequences of child maltreatment. So this slide is a slide about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And extensive research shows that the more ACEs you have a significant negative impact on physical and mental health outcomes into adulthood. So you see here on the left-hand side that when people experience 5 ACEs, things that are related to abuse and neglect, that they have increased likelihood of negative outcomes. So 5 of the ACEs that were focused on in these research relate to abuse and neglect. For example, compared to people with no ACEs, when people have 4 or more ACEs, they're significantly more likely to smoke, experience alcoholism, attempt suicide, have cancer, and heart disease. And we also know that the impact of ACEs goes beyond health effects. Although not all children will experience negative outcomes if they have ACEs. Victims of child abuse are more likely to fail in school, lead a riskier life, experience chronic medical, mental health, and substance abuse problems in adulthood, and childhood trauma poses a significant barrier to economic self-sufficiency. So clearly the impact is broad. And it's not just on the child, but child abuse is also a key contributor to many social issues, such as homelessness, high rates of incarceration, increased drug and alcohol abuse, unemployment, and strained government and community resources. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about, hone in a little bit on some of the data. So we know what the impact of child abuse is on the individual, on the community, and on society. And I want to hone in a little bit more on the data of why we're really looking to narrow that front door by transforming mandated reporting. First, general neglect is the most common allegation in California and across the country. And it is of those of you who are mandated reporters and make reports know that general neglect is a very broad category and that it's often lumps in allegations that are very highly correlated with poverty and might be better mitigated by support for the family and caregivers. Support sometimes that relate to poverty, so basic needs, to ensuring that families have access to work and to housing and to utilities and food and clothing, as well as childcare. It also may be things like more intensive support, such as those when families are experiencing substance use or mental health interventions. In California, in 2023, 45% or nearly half of all reports were for general neglect. And this is pretty common throughout the country where it usually hovers around 45 to 50%. In addition, so we see, if this is the broadest category, we know that many of these issues may have been stemmed or stopped if the families just were able to receive those supports that they needed to thrive and be able to ensure that their children had what they needed. In addition, data shows us that in California, about only 11% of all child abuse reports are substantiated each year by child welfare. In other words, child welfare does not substantiate abuse in the great majority, almost 90% of all supports. So we need to figure out what's going on here and work toward reducing the reports where there isn't a real safety issue and that aren't substantiated. Are these issues that relate to a concern by mandated reporters that a family's, unstable and they don't know where to get the supports that they need to really ensure that this family has the stability they need? So we want to look at other ways, which Shevon will talk about, of how do we figure out how to support these families when it's not a safety issue and it's not necessary to have child welfare intervention or an investigation, but instead we really want to support the families. And CDSS is working on this to really try to help people understand the difference between general neglect and poverty. In the beginning, there was that one of the presenters is going to talk about one of the breakouts, and you can get those slides about the passage of the law changing the definition of general neglect so that it doesn't include poverty. And we're working on a training and rolling that out. So that training will be available for free online. Next slide. Not only are most reports related to general neglect and that there's significant over-reporting that is not substantiated, there is also a significant disproportional impact. You see here, 1 in 2 Black and Native American children experience child welfare investigation by the time they're 18. Just sit with that for a minute. That is shocking. And this continues throughout the child welfare system. It starts with mandated reporting and then continues out. We want to ensure that we address this, and we're working to address this both by transforming mandated reporting as well as building that network of support for families before crises happen. Next slide. So as I've mentioned, even if reports don't get investigated, they're not harm neutral. And here's some other harms. We talked about some. But as I addressed, there's trauma and stigma for families and children because of community perception. This trauma and the stigma can create a chilling effect. So it decreases families' trust in the organizations that they should be able to turn to in times of needs. Families don't seek support because they're afraid of a child abuse report. And this, in the long run, can really increase safety risks. It also, our current system can dissuade mandated reporters from finding other ways to support families because they're afraid of the liability that relates to our mandated reporting laws. And that we have been taught just report, report, report. But this then sometimes has mandated reporters turn to the child welfare system rather to community organizations or other ways to support families. And it ends up overburdening the child welfare system, the child protection hotline, with the reports that I talked about, 90% that do not require intervention by child welfare. And this limits child's welfare ability to address those situations where the child is truly unsafe or has a need. Next slide. And then finally, I want to talk about quickly the financial impact that child abuse has. This slide shows in 2023, there were 444,755 reported allegations of child maltreatment in California. And of these, 47,963 were substantiated, which is that same number, just about 11%. And we know from a study by Safe and Sound that approximately 48,000 of the surviving victims and 86 fatalities ended up in a lifetime impact, a cost to our state of approximately $16.5 billion. This includes those direct costs related to child welfare, healthcare, special education, as well as indirect costs related to adult and child criminality and productivity. Another way to think about that is 16.5 billion could send over 1 million kids to preschool. So if we invested on the front end, we know that early investment and early education really can support children and families throughout their lifetime. If we invested in that, then we might not have these long-term costs to society. So we're moving towards an approach that recognizes investing in prevention is not only critical to the well-being of kids and families, but it's smart. Next slide. This just talks about, my colleague Hillary talked about this, how at CDSS, we're working to shift that mindset from reactive to a proactive approach that focuses on child and family well-being and works again with our partners to improve the conditions and environments in which families live. We know this can feel overwhelming, particularly for those who work in the child welfare system that, as I mentioned, is overburdened and increasingly facing more challenging cases. But we really see both the reform of mandated reporting and a focus on prevention as a way to improve the outcomes for children and families and a way to reduce the burden on child welfare and on community agencies. Next slide. So here it's all coalesces into our vision at CDSS for prevention. You see it here. CDSS envisions an integrated statewide system that supports families to provide safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for their children and youth. That's our long-term goal. And our kin-first approach, that term may be new to some of you. It really promotes the research that children, even in challenging family situations, benefit from staying within their family or community network. And so we're really striving to find ways to prevent separations and, when necessary, place children in families or familiar situations within their communities. To move forward this vision, we focus on 5 core strategies: prevention and family empowerment, harm reduction, trauma-informed caregiving, and also proactive local supports and workforce development. And we also have values that move throughout. We need robust coordination with our partnerships. We need meaningful tribal engagement and tribal supports, as well as racial equity, continuous quality improvement, so that we can measure the success and integrity of the goals that we're working on. Next slide. So how do we do this? I mentioned again, this just shows in the screen, what are we doing at CDSS to move this forward? We focus on policies and guidelines related to prevention efforts. Shevon will talk about many of these and will provide resources at the end. We provide oversight of funding. We'll provide you some resources to learn about the funding that we offer through our Office of Child Abuse Prevention for both counties and individual organizations. And we partner with the local organizations to work on best practices and provide technical assistance. We also really work on that continuum of prevention services that Hillary mentioned: primary, secondary, tertiary. We encourage cross-sector collaboration through things like our 2083 legislation that you also heard a little bit about in the beginning. You know, how do we work with other disciplines, other parts of state government to ensure that families get all the supports they need? And then finally, we really work on that technical assistance to counties and tribes to make sure they have the support they need and the understanding and knowledge to move towards that shift towards prevention. Next slide. This just briefly shows, you know, we've created a governance structure to be able to move towards prevention and reform of mandated reporting. The structure ties to the Child Welfare Council, which exists in legislature and statute to provide recommendations to CDSS. And through the connection of all our different entities, all our different stakeholder entities, we ensure the integration with the Child Welfare Council, their recommendations, and the alignment of their work. And specifically, Shevon will talk a little bit about this, but for the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Program, which is a huge federal program that's being rolled out in our state in October of 2026 of this year, coming up. We have several different committees focused on tools, resources, and guidance. These include an oversight committee, the advisory committee, a training and technical assistance committee, a CQI committee, and a committee, a fiscal committee, work group and committee that is focusing on maximizing funding for prevention activities and ways to blend and braid funding. All of these have stakeholders representation from people with lived experience, community organizations, state entities, and counties. So we're really partnering to get a lot of different viewpoints and make recommendations on how we roll out this program. Next slide. I'm going to move towards some of the achievements that we've had on our efforts to transform mandated reporting. Next slide. So we talked about why move towards reforming mandated reporting. And this conversation has been going on throughout the state, and it started to lay the groundwork for significant reform. In March of 2023, the Child Welfare Council, which I just mentioned, which is that group that advises CDS, approved the creation of a diverse task force on mandated reporting to community supporting. The guiding star of that task force was what we've been talking about today: safely keep families together with the resources they need to thrive. And that task force met very frequently, had several subcommittees, and came up with a set of 14 recommendations in a report released in September of 2024. The recommendations fall into the areas of data gathering, re-examining existing policy and approaches, education for mandated reporters, building a narrative shift, and creating better community pathways for families to access report. Great news. The first recommendation, which was to establish a standing mandated reporting advisory committee, was established and codified in law in SB 119 in July 2025. CDSS is supporting the work of this committee by providing information and providing backbone and administrative support, as well as sitting on the committee and the steering committee. Next slide. We've also been working on the narrative shift. There have been over 25 statewide presentations. CDS has sponsored or participated in many of these presentations to really help people understand why do we need to change our current system of mandated reporting. And then also with the support of Casey Family Programs and Rally Communications, we're developing a set of communication tools that can be used in various settings with various audiences. Next slide. And then finally, I mentioned that big win with the passage of SB 119. Another piece of that legislation was the creation of a statewide training for all mandated reporters that will be available, or the update of that statewide training will be available online through the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. And it will include many of the core content that was recommended by the task force, such as things related to anti-bias and data about over-reporting. The state is making a large investment in this training. We've been working on it with various stakeholders, various input, and we've been working on it since June of 2025. And we will ensure that it is launched by July of 2027, or sorry, January of 2027, as codified in SB 119. And then I'm going to turn it over to Shevon, who's really going to dive into things that relate to some of the community pathway recommendations from both the task force and the work that we're doing around Family First Prevention Services.
Thank you, Jenny, for setting that foundation and the lead up for me. Like Jenny has said, my name is Shevon Walker. I'm the supervisor in the Early Intervention Services Unit, where we focus primarily on the implementation of the Family First Prevention Service Program. You can go to the next slide, Elizabeth. So just to provide an overview, FFPSA was established at the federal level with the goal of providing evidence-based prevention services to families and children to prevent foster care entry. This includes changing the structure of how Title IV-E funding can be claimed by recognizing that the system of care could be expanded to include prevention. FFPSA was codified in state statute at the FFPS program to expand on federal law to include primary and secondary prevention strategies that move services to families upstream and less reliance on the child welfare system, aka the foster care system. We are seeing this as a two-phased approach. One, we are leveraging the federal law through development of an FFPS infrastructure to take advantage of that federal Title IV-E funding and provide a foundation for expansion. The second piece is to develop broader community pathways outside of the FFPS program that leverage other initiatives and funding to create a sustainable system that ensures families receive services and supports that meet their needs and that are not reliant only on Title IV-E funding. Next slide, please. California's 5-year plan outlines how the state will provide evidence-based prevention services to families at risk of entering the foster care system to achieve the goals of the Family First Prevention Services Act. The federal government approved California's plan in 2023, and we will submit an updated plan in 2028. If you would like to see California's full plan, Elizabeth did drop that link in the chat. Next slide, please. So what is the goal of the California FFPS program? California's FFPS program seeks to provide services and supports to families with an aim to reduce trauma and address complex care needs early and effectively in a community-based setting prior to crises occurring that may lead to any system involvement. So again, prevent entry at all costs. So we can intervene early if we have those practices. That's what the goal is. Next slide, please. So prevention and family empowerment. California determined that the federal FFPSA did not go far enough to meet families where they are, choosing to implement community pathways to ensure families get services holistically within their communities via a no wrong door approach, as early as possible with the least amount of interaction with the CWS agency. State Block Grant provided funding to counties and tribes with the California Title IV-E agreement until 2028 to be able to begin supporting the building of the infrastructure for prevention services beyond what 4E funding can provide. The State Block Grant supports capacity building, prevention plan development, and bridge service delivery until October 2026 implementation. If you look in the chat, you will see that Elizabeth did drop the link to the Community Pathway Framework brief. Next slide, please. Comprehensive Prevention Planning, also known as a CPP. When opting into the FFPS program, counties and tribes with the 4E agreement submitted a comprehensive prevention plan that included primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention services and strategies driven by conducting gap analysis and asset mapping. Local implementation kept in mind certain things like county flexibility, extension beyond FFPSA funded services, planning with cross-collaborative teams, and coordination with tribes. Counties and tribes were asked to include at least one 4E eligible program that was chosen within the California State Prevention Plan. However, small counties currently have the opportunity to be exempt from the requirement of the one 4E eligible EBP. Our goal with that is to establish infrastructure and address capacity concerns, with State Block Grant to further support implementation of EBPs to receive 4E funding. The services included in the state prevention plans are listed here on the right. Although there may be opportunity to add more in the future, in phase one, we are focusing on infrastructure building that can support future expansion. To do this work, participating county child welfare and probation agencies and tribes with the 4E agreement establish cross-system partners, including, but not limited to, local behavioral health, the Office of Education, local community-based service providers, family resource centers, child abuse prevention council, LIV experts, and tribal representatives, just to name a few. Next slide, please. In addition to implementation of the State Block Grant, CDSS is supporting the creation of community pathways throughout the state through distribution and oversight of other prevention-related funding, as well as technical assistance in policy and practice development for these funding sources. I'm not going to walk through all of these funding sources now, but you can find out more information about them on the website of the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, for which we will provide the link in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So FFPSA implementation process and progress. We can go ahead and jump into the next slide. So in the years since the release of the Federal Family First Law, we have accomplished several things to support the infrastructure of the FFPS program. Initially, this was focused on a lot of community and partner engagement to share information and raise awareness about opportunities made available through state law. A lot of this work was slower than expected because of the timing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but by 2022, we had developed a funding allocation structure and were able to release $200 million in state funds to support local capacity development. With stakeholder advisory committees formed, we turned our attention to the more detailed work. In July of last year, we focused heavily on development of data to be collected via the state's case management system, CARES, to ensure that we can meet federal requirements for claiming and reporting. This is specific to the allowable eligible EBPs that enable us to claim the Title IV-E prevention services. Through the advisory committees and contracted partners, we began developing guidance and tools to support local implementation. Since then, the committees have focused on supporting implementation by reviewing guidance on policy and development of tools and resources. We released the Community Pathway Framework Brief last October to provide support specifically for implementation of a community pathway. We developed an exemption process to support small county participation, and we finalized our CQI plan in December. This year, we have focused on developing a series of implementation briefs. Now we laugh because they're never brief. Also, last year, we released our first joint letter with the Department of Healthcare Services, providing initial guidance on identifying the payer of last resort for the program as an FFPSA. Medi-Cal and other payments are required to be utilized when possible before claiming Title IV-E funds. We are currently working on a second letter with more explanation on particular evidence-based services. It's exciting to look back and see how far we've come and know that counties are engaged and able to use these resources to meet their goals of implementing FFPS. We want to acknowledge the work of our contracted partners, Child and Family Policy Institute of California and Chapin Hall, for their hard work and support in getting this program to where we are today. Next slide, please. And these are just some FFPS resources available to counties and community partners. So we have a practice brief for each EBP included in the federal portion of the plan. We have a CQI training plan plus an implementation plan. The first tier of the FFPS training plan has been made available locally. Our first of many to come implementation briefs on practice guidance is available, and a community pathway framework brief to support coordination and capacity building for county agencies and their community service partners. All of these resources are available on the Child and Family Policy Institute's website under prevention activities. And Elizabeth also dropped that link in the chat for you to reference as well. Next slide, please. So all that to say, what's next? What else can we do? In the coming months, we are continuing to develop the tools and resources that will ready us for implementation in October of 2026. We have been working on development of a training plan for the EBP, motivational interviewing. We anticipate that this will be one of the most widely used programs throughout the state, and it is unique in that many counties will be implementing this as a case management strategy with their own staff, as well as a service available via community providers. We are in the process of developing our plan for CQI implementation and the training processes that will support that implementation. We will be sharing additional FFPS implementation briefs and guidance as needed to continue implementation with CARES going live in October 2026. Next slide, I'm going to pass it back to Jenny to talk about some of our local support and workforce development.
Thank you, Shevon. And we just have a few more minutes and then we will open it up to questions. So next slide. So everything we talked about, we know that it doesn't work in California. California is a county administered state, which is actually quite unusual. There aren't many of them in the country. But this shift towards prevention, this rollout of these major programs can't work unless we support the localities that we've been talking about. So we really are trying to partner to reach our CDSS vision of a kin-first statewide system. And so a number of efforts are underway to do this. And we have been working, some of them, you heard a little bit about CQI. So we've been working closely with our consultant Chapin Hall to develop a CQI structure and to help counties measure and analyze how their efforts are functioning. And then learn what changes they need and report on their success. So we're building out that structure. We have many tools and resources related to it. And then we also provide, as part of it, we have CQI training also that we put out. We have peer collaboratives where agencies can talk cross-system and they can talk about how things are working in their communities, questions that they have about rolling this out. And that we can also ensure we have lived experts who are part of this. And we're working with a team of lived experts to ensure that the services that we're rolling out through our Family First Prevention Services Plan are tailored to both local needs and meet the needs of those in the community and those who are most impacted. We also have other technical assistance, particularly on my team and our branch, that is, that relates to overseeing more broadly the Family First Prevention Services Program, so that counties and tribes will be able to come to us with questions once we launch in October. And we also already have a structure that oversees some of that funding, that direct funding that comes through the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. So really we work, to strategize with communities how to best utilize the resources that they have available to both make sure that the needs are being met as well as to leverage other potential resources. And finally, in addition to training, we are developing more broadly communities of practice. An example of this is CalPrevents, which is an online virtual space that allows counties to come together to talk about what's happening with their prevention efforts, what are they learning, and how do they learn from others. And we'll provide a link to that at the end. And then we know that we need to really support the workforce at the local child welfare point. And so we're working to analyze and adjust our front end activities to really align with our prevention goals. Because if that first contact with the child welfare system doesn't have the training and support and doesn't have that prevention mindset, it also is going to be a huge barrier for the success of this program. We are working to ensure that the hotline and emergency response social workers have the training on prevention and early intervention that they need. We created a tier 1 training, the first of the trainings that is really trying to help the workforce shift their mindset to be a prevention-oriented mindset to understand the Family First program, as well as gain necessary skills that will be needed to ensure that families get connected to the resources they need. And then we're aligning these efforts with other trainings. You heard about our updates to our mandated reporter training through the training around the change in the definition of neglect, as well as the overall broad training that we're working on. And then also the CQI training. We're integrating all of these so that the workforce at the front end of child welfare can shift towards prevention. Next slide. And then I'm going to touch basically on some of our values that underline all this work. Next slide. Again, we mentioned some of these values you see here that really prioritize equity and a trauma-informed approach. And we are working to ensure that we embed these values in all the work that we're doing at both the state and our support at the local level work, so that we really build a system where there's equitable access for all and that we meet the other systemic inequities. We're really honing in on social determinants of health, which we believe will also help reduce the disproportionate representation of Black and Native American families in the child welfare system. Next slide. And along with these, we're prioritizing throughout CDSS a focus on principles of harm reduction. So in all of our work, to keep that at the forefront of our mind when we work with families and youth and children, we want to approach it through a lens of harm reduction. We've created a consistent definition that's used and we're looking to ensure alignment of all of our policies and practices and those that relate to the local level with this harm reduction approach. I'm seeing that I got bumped out there, and I'm turning off my camera. It looks like my internet is unstable, but the next few slides are slides on resources. And Elizabeth, I'm going to let you go towards to our last one, and then we'll open up for questions.
Jeannie, I got the same unstable notification too, so I'm not sure if anyone else got it. But Elizabeth, you can move forward to closing this one. Any comments or questions we can answer for participants today? We have about 12 more minutes.
Hello, this is Vivian.
Hi, Vivian.
And I'm a community member. I'm a retired educator, and I participate in Stanislaus County Child Prevention Abuse Coalition. And so just listening to the presentation and all the information today is a little overwhelming. So I will have a lot of homework to do prior to next Wednesday's webinar.
Agree. This is a lot of information to
But I'm
digest.
excited to hear, about the focusing on the prevention and the harm reduction, and those are very important, crucial things, and things that like I mentioned, as a retired educator and as a mandated reporter when I was working in the schools, it's important for educators and for community members to be updated on the alignment on the prevention.
Thank you for being here. That's great. And once you have a chance to digest and research, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our mailbox down below.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Vivian. And then also in the PowerPoint, there's a slide on where you can get some more of those tools related to the Family First prevention. There are many briefs there. And then also with respect to learning more through the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. And so please feel free to dig in. And then, as Shevon said, contact us with any questions. And you may also be very interested when our new training comes out around both the change of the definition of neglect with respect to mandated reporting, as well as our broader mandated reporter training.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments, thoughts, concerns?
Trina dropped in the chat. This has been so helpful. I'm a part of a new child abuse task force for child care licensing, so it is within the setting of out-of-home care. And this information will all be very helpful in us figuring out our strategies. Right.
Well, if there's nothing else. Oh, Ginger, question about community pathways. Do you have a specific question, Ginger, or? You have a very specific question, which is helpful. Yes, so we didn't go too in depth into this, but some of you all know that alongside of rolling out this huge new program related to prevention, we also at the state are changing our data system, overhauling our data system, which has been in the works for many, many years. And our new data system is going to be called CARES, and this is how both counties as well as community organizations will upload data, and necessary data that we need with respect to our federal funding. Um, so yes, there have been the launch of that is happening in October 2026. And it has been moving along, but there's still a lot of questions we know that remain with what is it going to really look like? How are we really going to upload our data into CARES? And I'm not sure if this is perhaps one of your questions, Ginger, but there is a firewall that is being established within CARES so that information for those families that are only receiving prevention services, so there's no open case within the child welfare system, we want to ensure that none of their data is put into the data collection system of the child welfare system. So we have a firewall in order to separate out that data and information for those families. And the information is also aggregated, so it's not on an individual level, so it wouldn't be revealing any confidential information. Um, and Katrina, I see that you're asking whether there's an individual person or the inbox. It's easiest to just reach out to the inbox, and we monitor that regularly. We have somebody assigned to it, and they can get your question to the right person. Thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to go back to the end slide about I know you're about what's coming up next with regard to these webinars? Oh, there you go. Perfect.